think it's the case that now we can say pretty clearly that it was the Russians that engaged in this activity.
And this breaking news, as it happened just moments ago, the president suggesting that the massive hack may have been carried out by someone else, not Russia. Let's go to NBC's Josh Letterman. He's joining me from Washington, D.C. Josh, let's get right to what the president's saying about this.
These are the first comments from the president since this hack first came to light a week ago, Alex. And instead of talking about the risks here, which have been laid out across the board by national security officials about this hack that has now affected the Treasury Department, the Defense Department, the State Department, the U.S. National Security Agency, the Cybersecurity Agency, and many others, the president instead is downplaying this and directly contradicting Secretary of State Mike Pompeo about who might have been behind it. The president tweeting just a few minutes before we came on the air that the cyber hack is far greater in the fake news media than in actuality. President Trump saying he's been fully briefed and that everything's under control, but that Russia, Russia, Russia is the priority chant when this kind of thing happens. The president raising the prospect that, in fact, it could have been China. The president also making the alarming comment that it could have been also involving some type of cyber breach of our elections system, which is not something that we have heard from any security officials in the last week or so. Now, these comments suggesting that it could have actually been Beijing behind this attack and downplaying the severity of it directly contradicted what we heard from Secretary of State Pompeo just yesterday as he gave an interview to a radio host. Take a listen to what Pompeo had to say.
There was a significant effort to use a piece of third-party software to essentially embed code inside of U.S. government systems and now peer systems of private companies and governments across the world as well. This was a very significant effort, and I think it's the case that now we can say pretty clearly that it was the Russians that engaged in this activity.
And in fact, Alex, we had started hearing from U.S. officials and from other cybersecurity officials as long ago as 1 week ago, basically as soon as this came to light, that all signs pointed to Russia. So now we are asking the White House and the State Department why the president is suggesting without any evidence that, in fact, this was China. So far, radio silence from them. But this is just the latest example, Alex, that we've seen over the last 4 years of the president downplaying the threat to the United States from Russia, seeming to cover for Russian President Vladimir Putin when there have been signs of Russian malign activity towards the United States, including the alleged paying of bounties or offering of bounties to troops in Afghanistan to kill U.S. troops and other actions by the Russians that have not seemed to get the response from President Trump that security officials have said is merited by their behavior.
It is absolutely extraordinary because, as you aptly said, Josh, the president is offering no proof whatsoever in pointing the fingers, just saying it may, he said parenthetically, be China, as if just to throw that out there in the ether into the conversation. Also, equally stunning, the fact that he would suggest that it would be an infrastructure within the United States that would hack into the Treasury Department and other departments relative to our national security. It's hard to fathom how the president even makes this kind of a tweet, given the severity of this particular situation. We're going to talk with some people about that coming up. But let me also ask you quickly about the president who's, I mean, he's ramping up these relentless efforts to disrupt this peaceful transfer of power come January 20. What is he telling his supporters now?
Well, the president is now talking about January 6th, that date when there's going to be that joint session of Congress to affirm the results of the Electoral College vote for President-elect Joe Biden. The president now saying in a tweet overnight that he expects there to be a massive protest here in Washington on that date, saying, "Be there, will be wild." We know just 1 week ago, the last time there were protests here for the president's so-called Stop the Steal misinformation campaign, it was very violent. But what the president seems to be referring to is that vote in Congress where there's expected to be a push by Republicans both in the House and at least by one incoming senator in the Senate, a Republican, Tommy Tuberville, to try to actually throw out some of the Electoral College votes from states that voted for President-elect Joe Biden. We do not expect that that effort will have the mathematical numbers to actually be able to succeed.
Okay, buckle up. January 5th in Georgia, January 6th next there in D.C. Thank you, Josh. Joining me now is Zerlina Maxwell, Director of Progressive Programming at SiriusXM and host of the show Zerlina on Peacock. Kurt Bardella, Lincoln Project Senior Advisor and former spokesman for the House Oversight Committee. And Elise Jordan, former aide in the George W. Bush White House and an MSNBC political analyst. Welcome all. Zerlina, you first here. The president's first comments on this massive cyber attack. What do you make of that? Mike Pompeo even said that Russia's behind it. Why can the president not say that?
The first thing I thought, Alex, when I heard that Russia had attacked so many entities in the United States, private and government, is that this is the president that said, Russia, if you're listening, why don't you go hack Hillary's emails and try to find the so-called missing emails? And so the Russia, if you're listening, president isn't going to say that Russia is behind a hack when he was the one asking them to hack in 2016. And ever since, he's been essentially a Putin apologist, always siding with the Russian president and even in Helsinki. And I think that, you know, all of this has been troubling since the beginning, since that moment he said, Russia, if you're listening. And I remember at the time it was shocking, not just because it seemed as if you had an American president asking a foreign entity, an adversary, to attack another American, but also that that person who said that went on to become the president and was consistent with those views all throughout his presidency. And now that he's no longer going to be the president, unfortunately, he's still going to do damage to our national security. And this is a very serious attack, Alex. The more information that is coming out, the extent to which Russia was able to infiltrate not just private businesses, but also government entities, is something that all of these national security folks and the folks involved in the transition need to immediately be able to get to work. And Donald Trump's administration is also preventing that work from being done. And it's all dangerous.
Let me go across the screen here. So, Kurt, your response to this next, to the president's tweet that directly contradicts, by the way, his own Secretary of State.
I mean, this is a pattern of behavior, not an isolated incident. We saw when Trump sided with Russians over our own FBI in Helsinki. We've seen it when Trump failed to even acknowledge and condemn the bounties that President Putin has put on American soldiers. And now we're seeing it happen again as on his way out the door, the greatest cyber attack perhaps against our country ever, perpetrated by Russia, validated by the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. And Trump is trying to point the finger somewhere else, trying to use it to help his effort to undermine our democracy and the electoral process. And it's unconscionable. And let's be clear, this is what the Republican Party has sold their soul to promote, to prop up, to help, to aid, and abet. They have sold out America so that they can help this president and parrot Russian propaganda over and over and over again. It is a complete betrayal of the oath of office. It is a betrayal of what American values are supposed to stand for. And during these 4 years, the one thing that has been consistent is that American interests have taken a step back, while Russian interests have taken a step forward. At the expense of our own security, at the expense of our own country, Republicans are enabling a president and helping a president completely tear down the fabric of our country. And now our institutions have been compromised, attacked with this unprecedented scale of a cyber attack. And where are the Republicans? They're helping Donald Trump try to steal the election. Yeah,
and Elise, can you weigh in on the relative absurdity of this president saying, you know what, this has to do with the election, folks. This is all about the election, too.
You know, at this point, we just have to call this what it is. It's more delusion from Donald Trump. This is not the behavior of a stable person who is able to exercise reason and logic. He is the biggest purveyor of misinformation from the biggest platform in the world. And it's dangerous and it's harmful. And the fact that Donald Trump is sowing this kind of disorder over a free and fair election that he lost fair and square, and is encouraging, he said in that tweet that it was going to be a, quote, wild time. It will be wild. That does not sound like a president who is trying to usher in a calm and orderly transition of power. We've seen that he wants to stoke the delusion, and he is going to continue to try to do whatever he can to cling to power, however ineptly and impotently. I think that's really our only saving grace here, is that he is just not a very competent, want to be authoritarian. in his final days, and that's what we're going to have to see play out until January 20th, and let's just hope it is all peaceful at the end of the day.
And listen, you've got to wonder when it comes to his legacy. I know it was Doris Kearns Goodwin who said so much of a president